Let's take a look at 5 wrestlers who hated Paul Wight. And trust me, this wasn't your average backstage tension. These rivalries came from wild controversies and shocking incidents that once shook WWE and kept fans on the edge of their seats. So, let's dive right in. Hulk Hogan. When Paul Wight first stepped into WCW as the Giant in 1995, he was immediately thrown into the biggest spotlight possible. Literally against the biggest name in wrestling history, Hulk Hogan. WCW marketed Wight as the son of Andre the Giant, a bold storyline that naturally set up a feud with Hogan, Andre's old rival. For Hogan, this wasn't just another storyline, it was a battle for his legacy. For Paul Wight, it was his introduction to the world. At first, Hogan saw potential in Wight. He believed WCW could use a new monster heel to make him look even more heroic. But as Wight's popularity began to rise, things got complicated. The Giant was young, athletic, and fresh, qualities Hogan no longer had by that point in his career. Backstage whispers began suggesting that Paul Wight could become the next big attraction, maybe even bigger than Hogan himself. And that's where the friction began. Their first major clash came at Halloween Havoc 1995, where the Giant shockingly defeated Hogan for the WCW World Heavyweight Championship, thanks to some over-the-top storytelling and interference. Though Hogan technically lost due to a disqualification reversal, the message was clear. WCW wanted the Giant to be seen as a real threat. Hogan, who was known for carefully controlling his storylines and who got to go over, wasn't thrilled. Behind the scenes, tension reportedly grew as Hogan felt Wight was too green and didn't yet deserve such a huge push. Hogan had a reputation for protecting his spot, and many in WCW felt he started keeping Wight at arm's length after that first feud. Over time, Hogan made sure future matches leaned more in his favor, turning the tide so that the Giant's momentum cooled off. When Hogan turned heel and formed the NWO in 1996, Paul Wight eventually joined the group, but that didn't end their rivalry. It just changed the tone. Wight felt like an afterthought in the faction, constantly overshadowed by Hogan's spotlight. In interviews years later, Wight admitted that his relationship with Hogan was complicated. He respected Hogan's star power, but resented how he was treated during that period. Hogan, on the other hand, saw Wight as talented but undisciplined. Via the time Paul Wight left WCW for WWE in 1999, the two men had mutual respect, but little friendship. Their rivalry wasn't just about storylines, it was about pride, power, and the battle for top billing in a company too small for two giants. 2. Brock Lesnar. When Paul Wight, then known as The Big Show, first crossed paths with Brock Lesnar in 2002, it was a true clash of monsters. Brock was the new next big thing, a freak athlete with insane power and intensity. Wight, on the other hand, was a veteran giant looking to prove he still mattered in a locker room full of rising stars. Their feud wasn't just physical, it was personal, fueled by jealousy, pride, and mutual disrespect that occasionally spilled beyond the scripted world. At first, Paul Wight had nothing but respect for Brock's raw ability, but as Lesnar skyrocketed to fame, winning the WWE Championship within months of his debut, Wight started to feel pushed aside. He'd been in WWE for years, paying his dues. Yet suddenly, this 25-year-old rookie was being treated like a once-in-a-generation superstar. Behind the scenes, Wight reportedly didn't appreciate how fast Brock's ego grew, and Brock didn't care much for veterans who couldn't keep up with him in the ring. Their first major showdown came at Survivor Series 2002, when the Big Show shockingly defeated Brock Lesnar to capture the WWE Championship. Thanks to Paul Heyman's betrayal, it was a powerful story. Lesnar, the unbeatable monster, was finally brought down by a bigger, meaner one. But off-camera, Lesnar wasn't thrilled about being pinned by anyone, even a veteran like Wight. Still, he understood the business. He needed to lose to build his comeback story. Their rivalry escalated into some of WWE's most unforgettable moments. The most iconic came in June 2003 on SmackDown, when Lesnar and Wight battled so hard that the ring literally collapsed after a superplex from the top rope. Though scripted, the stunt cemented their feud as one of the most destructive ever. For fans, it was two monsters destroying everything in sight. For the men themselves, it was a physical war, Brock's intensity versus Wight's brute strength. Despite their professional chemistry, things weren't always smooth. Wight later admitted that Lesnar was a freak of nature, but could be hard to like. Brock was all business, cold, focused, and sometimes dismissive of anyone who couldn't match his energy. Wight, who prided himself on being a team player, often clashed with Lesnar's lone wolf attitude. Still, their battles defined an era of WWE's SmackDown brand. Two real-life titans colliding again and again to see who truly ruled the land of the giants. Even years later, when both returned for special appearances, that tension never fully disappeared. 3. The Undertaker. When Paul Wight, The Big Show, and The Undertaker first crossed paths in WWE in 1999, it wasn't just a feud, it was a test. Wight had just left WCW, where he'd been the giant, and WWE wanted to see if he could hang with their biggest names. The Undertaker, already a locker room leader and symbol of toughness, wasn't about to make it easy. What started as a storyline rivalry soon turned into a real-life lesson in respect and maturity for the newcomer. Their first run-ins came during The Undertaker's Ministry of Darkness era. Wight was still finding his footing in WWE, and while he had the size, he lacked the ring psychology and discipline that made someone like The Undertaker special. Taker noticed that right away. He was known for mentoring younger wrestlers, but only those who earned it. Wight, at that time, was still adjusting to the WWE style, and his early performances didn't impress the locker room's veterans. That led to tension. The Undertaker reportedly thought Paul wasn't taking things seriously enough. During one road trip, Taker famously pulled Wight aside and gave him some tough love. He told him bluntly that if he didn't start working harder and acting like a professional, he wouldn't last in WWE. According to Wight himself, that conversation changed everything. It was harsh, but it came from a place of respect. From that day forward, their relationship started shifting from friction to mentorship. On screen, their rivalry took several forms. At WrestleMania 15 season, they battled in chaotic tag matches and singles bouts, with The Undertaker often getting the upper hand. Later, they even teamed up for a while in 1999 as part of The Undertaker's Unholy Alliance. The chemistry between them was electric, two powerhouses who dominated anyone in their way. But even as partners, the tension was there. The Undertaker was the leader. Big Show was still learning how to carry himself at that level. Behind the scene, Taker's influence pushed Wight to evolve. He toughened up, got in better shape, and started taking pride in his craft. Over time, that early resentment transformed into genuine respect. The Undertaker later admitted that Paul Wight had become one of the most dependable big men in the business, while Wight always credited Taker for making him a man in this business. Their later matches in the 2000s, like their brutal brawls in 2003 and 2008, showed how far Wight had come. The student had learned from the master, and their encounters became showcases of mutual respect instead of rivalry. 4. Mark Henry. When Mark Henry and Paul Wight, The Big Show, faced off, it was never about speed, style, or showmanship. It was about raw power. Two of the strongest men in WWE history, both built like tanks, colliding in battles that felt less like wrestling matches and more like natural disasters. But behind their on-screen rivalry was a mix of pride, competition, and occasional real-life tension between two men who refused to be seen as second best. Their paths had crossed many times over the years, but their most memorable feud came around 2011, when Mark Henry reinvented himself as the ruthless, Hall of Pain version of his character. After years of being overlooked and used in comedic roles, Henry snapped. He turned vicious, dominant, and meaner than ever. And the first man he targeted to prove his new dominance was none other than The Big Show. At Money in the Bank 2011, their first major showdown was pure destruction. It wasn't flashy or technical. It was two monsters throwing haymakers and testing who could stand last. The match ended in shocking fashion when Henry splashed Big Show through a table and then crushed his leg with a steel chair, writing him off TV for weeks. Fans were stunned. The attack made Henry look unstoppable, but backstage, there were whispers that the two giants had legitimate heat. Both were veterans, used to being the strongest man in the room. and neither liked backing down. Their feud continued into Vengeance 2011, where they did something nobody thought possible. The ring collapsed again. It was the second time in WWE history, the first being Big Show versus Brock Lesnar, and it perfectly captured the chaos of their rivalry. Though it was scripted, the impact was real. Mark Henry was now being portrayed as so powerful that even the Big Show couldn't contain him. Behind the scenes, however, their relationship was complicated but respectful. Both men had come from similar struggles, being told they were too big, too slow, or too limited. They faced criticism and fought to stay relevant. That mutual understanding eventually replaced any personal bitterness. Wight later admitted that Henry's Hall of Pain run was some of his best work, and Henry credited Big Show for pushing him to perform at his best. Still, the feud left its mark, literally and figuratively. Their battles were brutal, filled with broken tables, bent chairs, and shattered rings. They represented an era when giants ruled WWE, and when Mark Henry and Paul Wight shared the ring, it wasn't just a match. It was a test of who was truly the world's strongest man. 5. The Big Boss Man. The rivalry between the Big Show, Paul Wight, and the Big Boss Man in late 1999 stands out as one of the most controversial and bizarre storylines in WWE history. What began as a typical feud between two tough powerhouse wrestlers turned into something deeply personal and shockingly dark. It was an angle that blurred the line between entertainment and cruelty, leaving fans stunned and sometimes even uncomfortable. It all started when the Big Show won the WWE Championship at Survivor Series 1999. As the new top star, WWE needed a villain to push him emotionally as well as physically, and the Big Boss Man fit the role perfectly. Known for his mean streak and twisted sense of humor, Boss Man began targeting Big Show not just in the ring, but in his personal life. That's when the storyline took a wild turn. In one of the most infamous segments in WWE history, the Big Boss Man mocked the Big Show by announcing that his father had passed away, a storyline based on the fictional death of Wight's dad. The cruelty didn't stop there. During what was portrayed as Big Show's father's funeral, Boss Man showed up in a police car with a loudspeaker, shouting insults. Then, in a jaw-dropping moment, he hooked the casket to his car and dragged it away while Big Show clung to it, crying and being dragged across the ground. It was shocking, over the top, and instantly became one of WWE's most talked about moments, though for all the wrong reasons. The feud continued from there, with Boss Man taunting Big Show week after week. He even read a fake poem about Show's father's death and sent him cruel sympathy messages on live TV. While many fans found it offensive, it undeniably got people talking. The Big Boss Man became one of the most hated villains in wrestling, and Big Show earned massive sympathy as the grieving son pushed to his emotional limit. Their rivalry came to a head at Armageddon 1999, where Big Show defended his WWE Championship against Boss Man. The match was short but explosive. Big Show dominated, finally getting revenge for the months of torment. He demolished Boss Man, ending the feud with a definitive win that symbolized closure after the chaos. Looking back, even WWE has admitted that the storyline was extreme, perhaps too much for its time. Yet it worked in one sense. It made Big Show look human. Fans connected with him not just as a giant, but as a man who'd been humiliated and hurt, but refused to break. And the Big Boss Man? He cemented his legacy as one of the most heartless villains the company ever produced. And that's a wrap for today's video. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss an update. See you next time. Bye.